Hello and welcome. Title of video is Huge Panic at Kremlin. Many emergency call from Putin just leaked. Russian soldiers waved white flag. If one side in a war has realized the pointlessness of the war and has recognized the superiority of the other side, there is no rational explanation for the continuation of the war. And when we look at the situation of the Russian army, we see that it has accepted many. Since the beginning of the war, the Ukrainian army has been achieving great successes against the Russian army, and almost the whole world is aware of the military success of the Ukrainian army because the Ukrainian army has no difficulty in reclaiming its lost territories and cleansing all the Russian invaders from its territory one by one. This stability and success of the Ukrainian army completely frightens the Russian army, and they know that they have no chance in. Almost nobody in Russia supports this war, and the Russian people are strongly against this decision to invade, and nobody wants to be part of this war that Putin started for its own interest. The Ukraine-Russia war has shown the helplessness of the Russian army and have difficult. The situation is the Russian people are over there from the very beginning that the war is pointless, but the Russian army does not even want to be on the battle. Because the Russian army is also aware of the great truth, this realization is leading them to surrender. Let's take a look at how the Russian army surrendered and the details of the events. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense shared some information about these developments. Ukraine has recaptured many regions occupied by Russia and inflicted huge losses on the Russian army in these regions. Although the fighting between Ukraine and the Russian army is still ongoing in the Karen region, Ukraine has made great progress in Castle and has retaken almost most of this region. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense has released some footage of the incident in Kars region. These images are recorded in a town in Kherson region. In the footage, Russian soldiers are seen hanging a white flag on the tank. They are, and slowly approaching Ukrainian soldiers with this tank. Suspicious of this, Ukrainian soldiers surround the Russian tank. But then something very surprising happens. The Russian soldiers stop the tank. They are driving, put their hands in the air and get out of the tank. All three Russian soldiers surrender to Ukrainian troops. When the Ukrainian army looked into the tank of the surrendered Russian soldiers, they found a large number of weapons and ammunition and confiscated them. These moments were not recorded, and the identities of the surrendered Russian soldiers were never revealed. The Ukrainian army is working with great care and sensitivity to ensure the safe return of the soldiers to their country. The statements that the surrendered Russian soldiers want to make are also hidden by one of the soldiers who has served on the battlefield and wants to make a statement is Anthony. The name Anthony is a seed used to prevent the soldiers through identity from being revealed. Anthony lived in Bashkortostan, a predominantly Muslim region in Russia, and Bashkortostan is still a part of the Russian Federation, although it is trying very hard to become independent from Russia. One of the biggest problems of the Russian army is the lack of soldier. There is a huge shortage of military personnel on the front line, and one of the solutions Russia found for this problem was to involve people from Bashkortostan. And the war, the Kremlin said that it would pay the people there a large sum of money if they would join the war. As a result of this pressure, many of the poor people in Bashkortostan, the poor people in Stan, decided to join the war, and Anthony went to the front. He saw 42 Russian soldiers being slaughtered by Ukrainian drones, and Anthony was so alarmed that he explained the events as follows. The artillery of the Ukrainian army was so accurate that David bombarded our trenches meter by meter. We had 10 rows of trenches and they started hitting each one in turn. According to Anthony, Russia had no chance against Ukraine, and Anthony realized this from day one. He tried many ways to get back to his home country, and it took many days. But Anthony finally reached his family. Anthony plans to stay in his home for a while longer without revealing his address or identity. One by one, Russian soldiers are leaving the army because they know they cannot win. Many Russian soldiers are surrendering secretly to Ukrainian troops. The number of surrendered soldiers is carefully kept secret by the Ukrainian army. It is expected that the Ukrainian army will announce this number after the end of the war. Following the statements made by Ukrainian President Zelensky, more and more Russian soldiers are surrendering to Ukrainian troops. Zelensky, who can change the course of the war, even with his speeches, makes phone calls to Western countries and these calls are about support for Ukraine. All the leaders who told to Zelensky want to help Ukraine more. Zelensky is keeping his country afloat thanks to his meetings and conversations. The aid to Ukraine is improving the country, the army, and the people. Zelensky is following a very good strategy in this war. After Zelensky's speeches for Russian soldiers, more Russian soldiers want to surrender to Ukrainian troops. Main thing maybe is motivation. I think that they don't have motivation. And according to war experts, this war is the war in which the most soldiers surrendered in the history of the world. With this analysis, Putin's reputation is in, because it is becoming common knowledge that he's a failed leader incapable of keeping his troops in the army. According to the British press, there are thousands of Russian soldiers preparing to surrender in Donetsk regions. The Ukrainian army is organizing many operations and making plans to retake these. Aware of this, Russian soldiers are thinking of surrendering before the Ukrainian army attacks, and many majors are involved in these preparations because they know very well that they cannot do anything against the Ukrainian army. If you look at the plans of the Russian occupiers, the Ukrainian army will easily take back to occupied territories without any great, because if the Russian occupiers there lay down their arms and surrender to Ukrainian troops, it means that the Ukrainian army will be able to take back control of the territories. Ukrainian government officials have issued a number of warnings to the soldiers who want to surrender as soon as possible and reiterated that the soldiers who want to surrender should contact the Ukrainian government. The Ukrainian government has set up a hotline called I Want to Live for Soldier who want to surrender. Thousands of Russian soldiers surrendered with the help of this communication line. Ukrainian authorities have created a secure site for Russian soldiers who want to surrender and said that they want to communicate with soldiers who want to surrender en masse. They emphasize that this is the safest way for soldiers who want to surrender.